She was just a float nurse, a ghost in pale blue scrubs, drifting between the chaos of the ER and the sterile quiet of the ICU, filling whatever gap was on the schedule that day. He was the chief of surgery, a god in a white coat who believed the hospital, and everyone in it, orbited his genius. He made a deal in the dark, using the sanctity of his operating rooms as a criminal safe house. But when the bill came due in blood and bullets, neither he nor the men who came to collect knew the quiet nurse was a phantom of a different kind, a whisper from the world's most elite killing unit. Now, let me take you inside St. Jude's General, to the trauma bay where it all came apart. Her name was Clara, and most people didn't know it. To the residents, she was nurse. To the attending physicians, she was a pair of hands. To Dr. Alistair Finch, she was part of the furniture, something to be ignored unless it was in his way. Today, it was in his way. "Excuse me," he said. The words clipped and frosted with impatience. He didn't look at her. His gaze fixed on the chart in his hand, as if it contained the secrets of the universe. He made a small, dismissive gesture, a flick of the wrist that said, "Move." Clara was checking the calibration on a ventilator, a routine, mindless task that anchored her to the present, to the steady beep and hum of the machines that were the hospital's heartbeat. She stepped aside without a word, her movements economical and silent. She had learned long ago that the best way to survive in places like this was to take up as little space as possible, to become invisible. Finch swept past, a whirlwind of expensive cologne, starched cotton, and towering arrogance. He was a handsome man, the kind of handsome that came from money and the lifelong certainty of his own importance. Silver at the temples, a jaw that could cut glass, and eyes the color of a winter sky that saw patients as puzzles and staff as tools. "That ventilator in Bay 3 was due for recalibration an hour ago," he said, still not looking at her. He spoke to the air in front of him, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous trauma bay. "I expect my equipment to be ready when I need it, not when a float nurse gets around to it." Humiliation, hot and sharp, pricked at the edges of her composure. It wasn't true. She was 15 minutes early on her rounds. But arguing with Dr. Finch was like arguing with a hurricane, pointless and destructive. "Yes, doctor," she said. Her voice was quiet, neutral, a placid lake that betrayed none of the currents moving beneath. He finally glanced at her, his eyes skimming over her face without registering a single feature. "See that it is." He strode away, his entourage of fawning residents scurrying in his wake like pilot fish trailing a shark. Clara watched him go, her hands still. The insult settled not as a wound, but as a piece of data. Arrogant. Believes his own press. Poor situational awareness. Treats subordinates as disposable. It was a threat assessment, a habit etched so deep it was instinct. She finished the calibration, her movements fluid and precise. The machine beeped its confirmation. Ready. Just like her. Always ready. The day bled into night. The controlled chaos of the afternoon rush gave way to the eerie, unpredictable rhythm of the graveyard shift. St. Jude's was a city hospital, a place of last resort for the city's broken, unfortunate, and violent. Clara had seen it all. Gunshots, stabbings, overdoses, the tragic aftermath of car wrecks. She moved through it with a practiced calm that other nurses mistook for detachment. They didn't see the way she clocked every entrance and exit, the way she noted the tension in a visitor's shoulders, the bulge of a concealed object under a jacket. They didn't see the ghosts she saw, the echoes of other, more violent places. She was in the staff lounge, stirring a packet of sugar into a cup of coffee that tasted like scorched earth, when the call came over the hospital-wide intercom. Code Omega, Trauma Bay 1. Code Omega, Dr. Finch to Trauma Bay 1. Code Omega was rare. It meant a high-profile patient, usually a politician or celebrity, requiring lockdown and absolute discretion. It was Finch's personal code, one he had implemented himself. It meant clear the decks. Clara dumped the coffee in the sink. The bitter smell filled her nostrils. Something felt wrong. The cadence of the announcement was off. The voice of the operator strained. She moved, not towards the lounge exit, but towards the fire stairs, her worn sneakers making no sound on the linoleum. Her station for the night was technically the cardiac ward on the 4th floor. But a float nurse went where the need was. And a Code Omega, especially at this hour, was a black hole that pulled in resources. She knew she would be called down. It was better to be close. She emerged into the ground floor corridor near the ER. The air was thick with a new kind of tension. Not the usual frantic energy of saving lives, but something colder. Sharper. 2 men in dark suits stood by the ambulance bay doors. They were too still, their posture too rigid for hospital security. Their suits were well tailored but didn't quite hide the sharp angles of shoulder holsters. Cops, she thought. Maybe feds. But their eyes were wrong. They weren't scanning for threats. They were containing a scene. They were guards. An ambulance, a private one with no city markings, was backing into the bay. Its lights were off. Silent. Dr. Finch was waiting, already scrubbed, a mask hanging around his neck. He looked electric, his usual arrogance charged with a nervous energy she'd never seen in him before. The back doors of the ambulance opened. The men in suits moved with chilling efficiency, flanking the gurney as it was rolled out. On it lay a man, pale and sweating, a dark stain spreading across the crisp white shirt covering his abdomen. Another man, older, with a face like a road map of bad decisions and a neatly trimmed silver goatee, walked beside the gurney, a hand resting on the patient's shoulder. He moved with the predatory gray of a jungle cat, his eyes sweeping the bay, cataloging every person, every piece of equipment. He was not a doctor. He was not family. Finch met them, his voice low and urgent. "Is the package intact?" The man with the goatee gave a curt nod. "For now. The entry wound is clean, but the exit is messy. Your job is to retrieve it, and to keep him alive. My associate will observe." Clara flattened herself into the alcove of a linen closet, the scent of bleach and sterile cotton filling her senses. Package. Retrieve. This wasn't a rescue. It was a recovery. The patient wasn't a person. He was a container. Finch ordered the bay cleared. "I need Nurse Davies and a resident. That's it. Everyone else out. Now." His voice cracked with strain. Then he saw her. He must have caught a flicker of movement in the corner of his eye. His head snapped in her direction. "You!" he barked, pointing a finger. "Float nurse, get in here. You can monitor vitals and stay out of the way." He didn't want her for her skill. He wanted her because she was nobody. A transient presence with no allegiances, no history at this hospital. A witness who could be easily discredited or, if necessary, easily disposed of. A cold knot formed in her stomach. Every instinct, honed in the dust of Afghanistan and the jungles of South America, screamed at her to disappear, to melt back into the shadows and walk away. But there was Nurse Davies, a grandmother with kind eyes who had shared her lunch with Clara yesterday. And there was the young resident, Dr. Chen, who was so green he still looked terrified every time a code was called. They were civilians. They were walking into a cage, and the door was about to be locked. She stepped out of the alcove. "Yes, doctor." The trauma bay doors hissed shut behind her, the sound as final as a tomb ceiling. The world outside vanished. Inside there was only the strained hum of the lights, the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor they hooked to the patient, and the chilling silence of the men in suits. One stood by the main door. The other, the one with the goatee, stood near the head of the gurney, watching Finch's every move. He smiled at Clara, a brief, predatory flash of white teeth. It was not a friendly gesture. It was an acknowledgement. A wolf seeing a sheep. Finch worked with a feverish intensity. "Scalpel. Suction. More lap pads, nurse, now." Clara moved, her mind a whirlwind of calculations. 2 hostile aisles armed with what looked like Sig Sauer P226S. 1 primary exit blocked. Secondary exit through the scrub room likely also watched. Potential weapons, scalpels, scissors, heavy oxygen tanks, defibrillator paddles. Finch was a liability, on the verge of panic. Davies and Chen were frozen with a fear they didn't understand yet. The patient on the table was the asset. His vitals were dropping. "His pressure is bottoming out," Clara said, her voice steady. 80/40. "I can see that," Finch snapped, his hands slick with blood. He was digging inside the man's abdomen. He wasn't trying to repair the damage. He was searching for something. The man with the goatee leaned closer. "Is there a problem, doctor?" he asked, his voice smooth as expensive whiskey. "The bleeder is deep," Finch stammered. "I can't find it. And I can't find the item." The hostel's smile vanished. His shoulders tensed like an internal switch had been flipped. He looked at the man by the door and gave a nearly imperceptible shake of his head. The deal was going bad. The heart monitor suddenly shrieked, a high, piercing tone that cut through the tension. "Flatline." Finch froze, his bloody hands hovering over the patient's body. "No, no, no." The man with the goatee took a step back. His hand disappeared inside his jacket. "The asset is compromised," he said, his voice flat and cold. "So is the contract." The man at the door drew his pistol. The sound of the slide chambering around was deafening in the sterile room. Nurse Davies gasped, a hand flying to her mouth. Chen looked like he was going to faint. This was it. The moment the world narrowed to a single, sharp point. They were loose ends, all of them. Clara had already been moving, not thinking, just doing. The change was instantaneous, a shedding of a skin. The quiet, invisible nurse evaporated. In her place stood something else, something forged in fire and shadow. As the first hostile raised his weapon towards Finch, Clara grabbed the heavy stainless steel instrument tray. She didn't throw it. She swung it, pivoting on her heel with the full force of her body. The edge of the tray caught the gunman on the side of the head with a sickening crunch of metal on bone. He went down without a sound, a puppet with its strings cut. One down. The man with the goatee was faster. His gun was already clearing his jacket. But Clara was inside his arc. She drove her shoulder into his chest, ramming him backward against a concrete support pillar. The air exploded from his lungs. His shot went wide, shattering a cabinet of medical supplies. The smell of antiseptic alcohol filled the air. She didn't give him a second to recover. Her left hand shot out, grabbing the wrist of his gun hand, twisting it hard. Bones grated. He grunted in pain, but his grip was like iron. Her right hand, free for a fraction of a second, snatched a disposable scalpel from the gurney. She was too close for him to aim. He was too strong for her to disarm easily. He brought his knee up, aiming for her stomach. But she anticipated it, turning her body so it glanced off her hip. In the same motion, she brought the scalpel up, not slashing, but punching. A short, precise, brutal jab into the bundle of nerves and muscle in his neck, just below the ear. The man's eyes widened in shocked surprise. A sound, half gasp, half gurgle, escaped his lips. His gun hand went limp. The pistol clattered to the floor. He slid down the pillar, his legs giving out, leaving a greasy smear of blood on the painted concrete. 2 down. Silence. A profound, ringing silence broken only by the fading echo of the gunshot and the frantic, panicked breathing of the 3 civilians behind her. Dr. Finch stared, his mouth agape, his face a mask of disbelief and terror. Nurse Davies was huddled with Chen against the far wall, their eyes wide with a horror that was slowly being replaced by sheer, uncomprehending awe. They were all looking at her. Not the float nurse, but the woman holding a bloody scalpel, standing over 2 unconscious, heavily armed men, her chest rising and falling in a steady, controlled rhythm. Her expression was utterly calm, focused, lethal. "Nobody moves," Clara said. Her voice was different, deeper, stripped of all warmth and deference. It was a voice that gave orders and expected them to be obeyed. "And nobody makes a sound." Finch finally found his voice, a reedy, trembling thing. "Who? What are you?" Clara kicked the pistol away from the second man's hand, scooping it up in a smooth, practiced motion. She checked the magazine, the weight of the weapon familiar and comforting in her palm. "I'm the person who just saved your life," she said, her eyes cold as chips of ice. "Now shut up and listen." Her mind was already working, processing, planning. This wasn't over. These 2 were just the welcoming party. There would be more, outside, waiting for a signal that would never come, or worse, waiting for the silence to become suspicious. "Chen," she snapped. The young resident flinched. "Your phone. Now." They made us put them in a locker," he stammered. "Landline," she commanded, pointing with the barrel of the gun to the desk phone in the corner. "Call 911. Tell them active shooter, St. Jude's Hospital, Trauma Bay 1. Use those exact words. Tell them multiple hostiles, police response required. Don't say anything else. Go." Chen scrambled to the phone, his hands shaking. Clara turned her attention to Finch. "Doctor, who are they? Who is he?" She gestured with the gun towards the dead man on her operating table. Finch was pale, sweating profusely. He looked from the bodies on the floor to the weapon in her hand. The god of the operating room had been reduced to a terrified man. I don't know. They're business associates." "Wrong answer," Clara said, taking a step towards him. The quiet menace in her voice made him flinch. "They came here to cut something out of that man, something they called a package, and they were willing to execute a world-class surgeon and his entire team to cover their tracks. That's not business. That's cartel." The word hung in the air. Cartel. Finch's face crumpled. The last of his blustering authority dissolved, leaving only raw, naked fear. "It was just a simple procedure," he whispered, his voice pleading. "They paid me. A lot of money. They said he'd swallowed diamonds in a latex bag. They just needed a sterile environment to retrieve them." Clara's eyes narrowed. It was a lie, but it was close to the truth. A clumsy, desperate fabrication. "Diamonds don't cause a man to bleed out from a gunshot wound, doctor. Try again." Before Finch could answer, Chen hung up the phone. "They're on their way," he said. His voice a squeak. "They asked who I was. What did you tell them?" Clara's tone was sharp. I hung up." Good. An incomplete call was better. It added to the urgency, the chaos. It would bring a faster, heavier response, but it wouldn't be fast enough. She estimated they had 10 minutes, maybe 15, before the first patrol cars arrived. An eternity. "Okay. New plan," she said, her voice dropping into a command tone. She was no longer a nurse. She was an operator in her element. "Davies, get the crash cart. Not for him." She pointed to the dead man. "For us. We need supplies. Saline bags, adrenaline, gauze, anything you can carry. Chen, find the heaviest, most solid thing in this room you can push." "What are you doing?" Finch asked, his voice trembling. "Securing our position," Clara said without looking at him. Her eyes were scanning the room, the ceiling, the vents. Those two had friends, and their friends are about to come looking for them. She pointed the gun at Finch. "And you. You are going to help me move these bodies. You got us into this mess, doctor. You will help me get us out." She needed a defensible position, and this trauma bay was a fishbowl. Glass doors, multiple entry points. It was a kill box. They had to move. But where? The hospital layout bloomed in her mind. A three-dimensional map she had built over months of walking its halls. Supply closets, maintenance tunnels, service elevators. Places most staff never saw. Places a ghost could disappear into. They dragged the bodies into the small scrub room, out of the immediate line of sight. Clara worked with an unnerving efficiency, her movements quick and purposeful. Finch fumbled, his expensive leather shoes slipping in the spreading pool of blood. He looked like he was going to be sick. "Focus, doctor," she hissed, "or the next body they find will be yours." Chen and Davies, spurred by a fear that was now greater than their confusion, were moving. Chen was shoving a heavy-duty portable X-ray machine towards the main doors. It wouldn't stop a bullet, but it would slow them down. Davies was loading supplies into a rolling cart. Clara paused, listening. The ambient hum of the hospital seemed louder now. Every distant sound a potential threat. Nothing yet. But the silence wouldn't last. She needed a way to signal for the right kind of help. The police were coming, but they would walk into an ambush. The men outside would be prepared for a conventional response. They wouldn't be prepared for her, but she was only one person. She needed backup, not just cops. She needed professionals. Her eyes landed on the security camera, a small black dome mounted in the corner of the ceiling. It was still active, local recording at the very least. It had seen everything. Her takedown of the two hostiles, her commands, her handling of the weapon. To a civilian security guard watching the tapes, it would look like a brave nurse having a very, very lucky day. But to a trained eye, an idea sparked. A long shot. A Hail Mary, but it was the only one she had. She walked over to the door leading to the main corridor, the one Chen was barricading. She took a roll of wide medical tape from the cart Davies had packed. "What are you doing?" Chen asked, his voice hushed. "Reinforcing the lock," she lied. She worked quickly, her fingers moving with a dexterity that had nothing to do with nursing. She looped the tape around the door handle and the frame, pulling it taut. But she didn't just wrap it. She tied it. A specific sequence of knots. An overhand loop, followed by a double figure-8 bend, finished with a taut-line hitch. It was a meaningless combination to anyone else. A secure, if strange, way to tie a rope. But to anyone from the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment. Delta. It was a sigil, a duress code, a way of saying, one of ours is here, and the situation is hostile. She added another detail. Using a black marker, she drew a small, simple triangle on the tape. The Delta symbol, a message in a bottle thrown into an electronic ocean. Far away, in a windowless room in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, a junior analyst was flagging unusual chatter, picked up from encrypted channels. A known cartel enforcers network had gone silent, centered on a location in a major U.S. city. It was odd. The analyst cross-referenced the location. St. Jude's General Hospital. He pulled up a public news feed. Nothing. He escalated, using his clearance to tap into the Municipal Emergency Services dispatch. He saw the 911 call. Active shooter. He made a call of his own. Within minutes, a live feed from St. Jude's security network was being piped to a secure server. General Marcus Thorne, woken by a call that bypassed all normal channels, was watching the feed on a tablet in his study. He was a man carved from granite and hard decisions, with eyes that had seen the worst of the world. He watched the chaotic footage from the EIR, the confused staff, the first responding officers taking cover outside. Then his aide directed him to the archived footage from Trauma Bay 1. Thorne leaned closer to the screen. He saw the deal, the patient, the flatline. He saw the two hostiles draw their weapons, and then he saw her, the nurse. He watched her move. He saw the economy of motion, the brutal efficiency, the tray, the disarm, the scalpel strike. It was like watching a ghost from his past. He'd seen those moves before, in training exercises in dusty kill houses and in grainy after-action reports from God-forsaken corners of the world. "My God," he breathed. He thought she was dead. Killed in the Beirut embassy bombing 5 years ago. Her name had been carved on a memorial wall. Then he saw her go to the door. He saw her tie the knots. He zoomed in, his breath catching in his throat. The overhand. The figure 8. The taut line hitch. A sequence he had personally drilled into his operators for years. A signal that meant compromised, under duress, but still operational. "Get me a secure line to the nearest JSOC task force," Thorne barked to his aide, his voice a steel whip. "Tell them I have a Nightingale in the wire. I want a Tier 1 team spun up and wheels up in 10 minutes. And get me the director of the FBI. I don't care what time it is. Tell him General Thorne is calling in a marker." He looked back at the screen, at the woman in the pale blue scrubs, at Sergeant Anya Sharma, call sign Nightingale, his best operator. And she was alive. Back in the trauma bay, Clara knew none of this. For her, there was only the cold reality of their cage. The clock was ticking. The silence outside was becoming heavier, more menacing. "They're here," she said softly. As if on cue, the handle on the main door jiggled. Then a heavy thud as a body slammed against it. Then another. They were testing the barricade. A voice, muffled by the door, called out, "Arturo? Miguel? Report." Silence from inside. "Open the door, or we are coming through." Clara motioned for the others to back away, into the scrub room. She took a position behind the concrete pillar, the pistol held steady in a two-handed grip. Her breathing was slow, her heart a steady, powerful drum. The fear was a cold, clean thing now, a tool to be used. It sharpened her senses, made the world crystalline and clear. If you were Clara, trapped and outgunned with only 3 terrified civilians to protect, would you wait for a rescue that might never come? Or would you take the fight to them? She didn't have to wait for an answer. A shotgun blast obliterated the lock on the door. The X-ray machine shuddered, but held. Another blast, and the door splintered, swinging inward on a single, screaming hinge. 2 men spilled into the room, dressed in black tactical gear, shotguns held at the ready. They were professionals, not like the 2 flashy enforcers from before. These were the cleanup crew. They saw the blood. They saw the empty gurney. They didn't see her. Not until it was too late. Clara fired twice. Double tap, center mass. The first man grunted, stumbling backward, his body armor absorbing the impact but the force knocking him off balance. The second man reacted instantly, swinging his shotgun towards the pillar. Clara didn't stay put. She was already moving, dropping low and skidding across the blood-slick floor, using the gurney as cover. The shotgun roared, pellets chewing up the concrete where her head had been a second before. She came up on the other side of the gurney, firing again. This time she aimed higher. The round caught the second gunman in the throat, above his vest. He dropped his weapon, clutching at his neck, a look of gargling surprise on his face as he collapsed. The first man had recovered, bringing his own sidearm up. Clara shoved the gurney hard. It rolled forward, slamming into him, pinning him against the wall. He fired, the shot going wild. Before he could correct his aim, she was on him, the muzzle of her pistol pressed against the side of his head. "Drop it," she commanded, her voice a low growl. He hesitated for a split second. It was 1 second too long. She pulled the trigger. The sound was flat, ugly. He slumped, his weapon clattering to the floor. 3 more down. The odds were improving. She reloaded, her hands moving with an automated grace, swapping the nearly empty magazine for the full one she'd taken from the first man she'd downed. She listened. The gunshots would have alerted everyone. The men outside. The police beginning to form a perimeter. The game had changed. Now it was a siege. "Stay here," she ordered the others, who were huddled in the scrub room, their faces pale with shock. "Barricade this door from the inside. Don't open it for anyone, unless you hear my voice." "Where are you going?" Nurse Davies whispered, her voice trembling. "Hunting," Clara said. She slipped out the shattered main doors of the trauma bay into the empty corridor of the ER. The hospital was a ghost town. Alarms were blaring now, a frantic, pulsing wail that echoed through the halls. Emergency lights cast long, dancing shadows. It was a perfect hunting ground. She moved like a wraith, sticking to the shadows, her stolen pistol held at the low ready. Every corner was a potential ambush, every doorway a threat. She could hear them now. Muffled voices, speaking in Spanish, the scrape of boots on tile. They were spreading out, sweeping the floor, looking for her, for the doctor, for whatever secrets were worth this much blood. Her objective was twofold: survive, and neutralize the threat before the police made their entry and walked into a massacre. She was behind enemy lines, and she was the only friendly. She saw a flicker of movement at the far end of the hall. A man, also in black, using a handheld mirror to check around a corner. A pro. She couldn't engage him from here. Too much open ground. She needed to change the terrain. She backtracked, slipping into a darkened records room. The air smelled of old paper and dust. She moved through the rows of shelves, her senses on fire. She could hear his footsteps now, slow and methodical, coming closer. He was clearing the rooms one by one. She found what she was looking for, a heavy metal fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. She hefted it, solid, good weight. She took up a position behind a tall shelf near the door, making herself small. She controlled her breathing, slowing her heart rate until she could feel each individual beat. She became part of the shadow, part of the silence. Waiting. The door creaked open. A sliver of light from the hallway cut through the darkness. A figure appeared, silhouetted. He stepped inside, sweeping the room with the barrel of his rifle. He didn't see her, not until she swung. She brought the extinguisher around in a vicious arc, aiming for his head. He must have sensed the movement at the last second, because he tried to turn. The heavy cylinder caught him on the shoulder and neck instead. The impact drove him to his knees with a choked cry of pain. His rifle clattered to the floor. Clara didn't hesitate. She dropped the extinguisher and followed up with a series of precise, disabling strikes. An elbow to the side of the head, a knee to the solar plexus. He collapsed onto the floor, unconscious. She relieved him of his rifle, an M4 carbine, and 2 extra magazines. Now the playing field was level. She dragged him deeper into the room, out of sight. 4. How many more? She remembered seeing at least 2 other men with the ambulance. That meant a minimum of 6 total, 2 to go, likely positioned at the main entrances to the ER, holding the perimeter against the arriving police. She found a service corridor at the back of the records room. A narrow, concrete-walled tunnel smelling of dust and ozone, filled with thick bundles of wiring and pipes. It was the hospital's circulatory system, and it would let her bypass their patrols. She moved through the darkness, one hand on the cool concrete wall to guide her, the M4 held tight in the other. She could hear the sirens now, closer, a lot of them. The police were massing. Good. But they would try to make contact, try to negotiate. They didn't know they were dealing with men who had no intention of leaving witnesses. She emerged from the corridor into a janitor's closet on the other side of the ER, near the main reception area. Peeking through the louvered door, she could see them. 2 men, positioned behind the thick marble reception desk, rifles trained on the glass doors of the hospital entrance. Outside, the flashing red and blue lights painted the night. They were dug in. A frontal assault was suicide. She needed a diversion. Her eyes fell on a large circuit breaker panel on the wall of the closet. The main electrical control for this wing. An idea, desperate and dangerous, took shape. She opened the panel. A complex web of switches and wires greeted her. She found the main breaker for the ER lighting. She took a deep breath and flipped the switch. The world outside the closet plunged into absolute darkness. The only light came from the emergency strobes and the flashing lights of the police cars outside. The 2 men at the desk shouted in surprise and confusion. That was her cue. She burst from the closet, the M4 already shouldered. They couldn't see her, a dark shape moving in the deeper darkness. But she could see them, silhouetted against the flashing lights. She fired. Short, controlled bursts, Not to kill, but to suppress. The bullets sparked off the marble desk, forcing them to keep their heads down. She used the noise and chaos to move, sprinting across the open floor to a new position behind a row of vending machines. One of the men, panicking, broke cover and started firing blindly into the darkness. A rookie mistake. Clara had her sights on the muzzle flashes. She squeezed the trigger, a single, precise shot. The man cried out and fell. The second man was smarter. He stayed down. He had stopped shooting, trying to pinpoint her location from her last shot. A waiting game. Clara didn't play his game. She lobbed a heavy floor-standing ashtray filled with sand into the far corner of the room. It landed with a loud crash. The man instinctively swiveled and fired a burst in that direction, and exposed his position. Clara rose from behind the vending machines and put 2 rounds into his center mass. He slumped behind the desk and didn't move again. 6. All hostiles neutralized. The ER was silent again, save for the incessant wail of the sirens. The immediate threat was over, but the bigger one was just beginning. She had to control the narrative. She had to get back to Finch. She made her way back to the trauma bay. The M4 held ready. The hospital was still dark, the air thick with the smell of cordite. She reached the scrub room and knocked a specific rhythm on the door. "Davies, Chen, it's me." The door opened a crack. A terrified eye peered out. Then the door was thrown open. Davies and Chen looked at her, at the assault rifle in her hands, with a mixture of terror and reverence. Dr. Finch was huddled in the corner, looking broken. "It's over," Clara said. "The threat inside is neutralized." She looked directly at Finch. "But the one you invited in is just getting started. I want the truth. All of it. Now." What was in that man? Finch finally broke. Sobs racked his body. "It wasn't diamonds," he choked out. "It was a prototype, a bioweapon, a strain of hemorrhagic fever, weaponized. It was sealed in a cryogenic pouch. They were buying it from a rogue Russian scientist and using a courier to mule it across the border. He got shot by a rival gang who wanted it. They brought him to me because I have a private lab, government grants. I could handle the material without raising flags. They were going to pay me $10 million. A cold dread, colder than any fear she had felt during the firefight, washed over Clara. This wasn't just a cartel hit. This was a potential pandemic. The package was still in the body. A body that was now in a non-refrigerated room, the pouch inside potentially compromised by the gunshot. "Where is your lab?" she demanded. "The sub-level," he whispered. "BSL-4. Access by my keycard and handprint only." Suddenly, a new sound cut through the sirens. The thumping, rhythmic beat of helicopter rotors getting closer. It wasn't a police or media helicopter. The sound was deeper, heavier, a military sound. Help had arrived. The right kind of help. Men in black tactical gear, no markings on their uniforms, rappelled from the helicopter hovering over the roof. They moved with a speed and precision that made the cartel gunmen look like amateurs. They secured the roof and began a systematic top-down sweep of the hospital. Simultaneously, the front doors of the ER burst open. An FBI hostage rescue team swarmed in, forming a perimeter. But they parted ways for one man who walked in behind them. General Marcus Thorne, dressed in fatigues, his face a grim mask of command. He swept the room with his gaze, his eyes finally landing on the small group huddled in the doorway of the trauma bay. He saw the terrified doctors, the shaken nurse, and he saw her. Standing in front of them, a rifle held loosely in her hands, her posture relaxed but ready. He walked towards her, his boots echoing in the silent ER. He stopped a few feet away. His eyes took in the blood on her scrubs, the exhaustion etched on her face, but also the familiar, unbreakable steel in her spine. He didn't salute. He didn't say her name. He just gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. A universe of respect and shared history passed between them in that one simple gesture. "Nightingale," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Report." The name hung in the air. Dr. Chen and Nurse Davies stared, confused. But Dr. Finch, who had dealings with military research, went pale. He recognized the call sign, a legend, a ghost story whispered in the halls of the Pentagon. "6 hostiles neutralized, sir," Clara said, her voice reverting to the formal cadence of the military. "But the situation is compromised. We have a BSL-4 contaminant on site. The asset is deceased. The package is still inside him." Thorne's jaw tightened. "Understood. My team will handle containment and recovery. You are clear." He looked past her at Finch, his eyes turning to glacial ice. "Dr. Alistair Finch, for conspiring to traffic a weapon of mass destruction on U.S. soil, you are being taken into federal custody under the Patriot Act. You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it." As federal agents cuffed a sputtering, indignant Finch, Thorne turned back to Clara. The hospital administrator and the police chief had arrived, their faces a mixture of confusion and awe. Thorne addressed them, but his words were for her. "This woman," he said, his voice booming with authority, "is a decorated veteran of the United States Special Operations Command. Her actions tonight saved the lives of every person in this hospital and likely prevented a national catastrophe. You owe her a debt you can never repay." He looked at Clara. "The world thinks you're dead, Sergeant. That gives you options. We can extract you, give you a new identity. You can disappear again." Clara looked around the ER, at the flashing lights, the shattered glass, the blood on the floor. She looked at Nurse Davies, who was staring at her with tears in her eyes. She looked at Chen, who was looking at her like she was a superhero. For 5 years, she had been a ghost, running from a past that had been stolen from her. But tonight, in this place of healing that had been turned into a war zone, she hadn't been hiding. She had been protecting. She had found a new mission. "With all due respect, General," she said, her voice clear and strong, "I think I'm done disappearing." The hospital administrator, a man named Henderson, who had always seen her as just another line on a staffing sheet, stepped forward tentatively. "Ma'am, Sergeant, whatever you did here tonight, this hospital, we've never had a security breach like this. Finch, he was in charge of our emergency protocols." He swallowed hard. "That position is now vacant. We need someone to rebuild it. Someone who understands the real threats. Someone like you." It was more than a job offer. It was an anchor, a place to be, a chance to stop being a ghost and start being a guardian. A small, tired smile touched Clara's lips for the first time that night. "I think I'd like that." The sun was rising as the last of the federal vehicles pulled away. The hospital was a hive of activity, but the chaos had been replaced by a sense of order, a sense of recovery. Clara stood in what used to be Dr. Finch's office, a grand space with a panoramic view of the city. Henderson had already had the nameplate removed from the door. She was still in her blood-stained scrubs, a cup of coffee clutched in her hands. She watched the city awaken, the first rays of sunlight glinting off the skyscrapers. She was exhausted, every muscle aching, her mind a quiet hum of after-action analysis. But for the first time in 5 years, she felt still, rooted. She was no longer Nurse Clara, the invisible float. She was not Sergeant Sharma, the ghost of Delta Force. She was something new, forged in the crucible of that night. She was the protector of this place, the quiet woman nobody saw, who saw everything, and who would always be ready. Paragraph-end-. Thank you for joining us for this story. If you enjoy our content and want to support the channel, the single most important thing you can do is subscribe. It truly keeps these stories alive. We'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever completely misjudged someone based on their job or quiet demeanor? Let us know below. There's another story already loaded up on the screen, and we hope to see you there.